the 9th year of entanglement with Leo. His mistress stormed into my birthday party, declaring their true love and demanding that I grant them a divorce so they could be together. Leo watched coldly, waiting for me to clean up the mess caused by his disobedient lover, just as I always had. But that day, I suddenly felt tired of it all. I stood up and gave him a faint smile. "I'm going to get some fresh air in the garden." Leo didn't think much of it, assuming I went out to cry in private, as usual. But 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3, and I never returned. He finally went looking for me. In the garden, all he found was a burnt-out cigarette and a ring. He knew I wasn't coming back. Chapter 01. Year 5 of Marriage. By the 5th year of our marriage, Leo had taken in a delicate and enchanting ballet dancer. Her name was Sandra. I heard that the first time Leo saw Sandra, he was captivated by her graceful elegance, her movements as ethereal as a fairy dancing under the moonlight. He kept her hidden away, treating her like a treasure, too precious to be seen by anyone, including me. But now, Sandra had come to me of her own accord. Her eyes were red, filled with accusations as she looked at me. "Leo doesn't love you anymore. The one he loves now is me. Don't you think it's cruel and unreasonable to keep him tied to you through marriage? Leo and I are truly in love. Please grant us a divorce and let us be together." She cried pitifully, like a tragic heroine whose happiness was being obstructed by a wicked villain, me. I found it laughable. "True love? You fell in love with another woman's husband. Don't you find that disgraceful?" Sandra's face turned pale, but in the next moment, she cried even harder, looking even more pitiful. "Yes, you're right. Falling for a married man is disgraceful, and I deserve your scorn. But love itself isn't wrong. I just want to be with the man I love forever. I really love Leo. I don't want to leave him. Can't you just let us be together?" Her words were absurd and naive, but Leo found her charming and fearless. He wiped away her tears tenderly and coaxed her in a gentle voice. "All right. Stop crying. I'll stay with you tonight." The room fell silent. He trampled on my dignity to defend Sandra. This was a kind of affection he had never shown his previous lovers. In the past, other women had come to me demanding I leave. When Leo found out, he made sure those women suffered. He had warned everyone, "Miranda is my wife. No one is allowed to provoke her." But today, Sandra ruined my birthday, and instead of punishing her, Leo indulged her. After instructing his secretary to escort Sandra home, he walked up to me and spoke in a low voice. "Don't worry, I won't let her act out again, so don't lay a hand on her." He was warning me. I didn't respond right away. Leo frowned slightly, his gaze icy. "Miranda, Sandra is young and doesn't know better." He even made excuses for her. "I understand. Don't worry," I interrupted, nodding in agreement. Leo's expression softened. He reached out to take my hand, but I instinctively pulled away. His face darkened with displeasure, but I only smiled at him and said, "I'm going to the garden to get some fresh air." Leo nodded. "Come back soon. We'll cut the cake together." "Okay." I turned and left, his eyes fixed on my back, but I didn't look back. Not even once. Chapter 02. I stepped out of the banquet hall and into the drizzle. I lit a cigarette. Through the swirling smoke, for some reason, I suddenly recalled the day Leo proposed to me. It seemed to be raining that day too. We met when we were 3 years old, fell in love at 16, and at 23, when Leo's business took off and he earned his first fortune, he proposed to me. "Miranda, will you marry me?" That day, he knelt in front of me, his hands trembling so much that he couldn't hold the ring properly. I lowered my eyes to look at him and asked just one question: "Will you love me forever?" Without hesitation, he swore, "Always." I believed him. I believed he meant it at the time, but feelings change so easily. At 27, Leo started seeing a younger, prettier woman. When I found out, he knelt before me, crying and begging me not to divorce him, promising he would change. But once there's a first time, there will always be a second, a third, and a fourth. Now, he doesn't even bother to hide it anymore, and I don't bother to make a scene. I've fought enough. I've seen enough. Like with Sandra, Leo treats her differently. For her, He warned and threatened me 3 years ago. Such a scene would have left me shattered and sobbing. But now, I only feel tired and disgusted, because I know better than anyone that Leo will never divorce me for Sandra. It has nothing to do with love. Our years of marriage have created too many ties. Too many shared interests. Divorce would be messy and offer him no benefits. He won't do it. And he's certain I won't either. After all, I've brought up divorce more than once over the years, but it always ended inconclusively. At first, it was because of love. Later, it was because of pride. But no matter the reason, after so many years of enduring this, I should have been used to it by now. Yet this time, I suddenly felt done. I didn't want to keep playing along. The ash fell from my cigarette. It burned my fingertips, making me flinch. Just then, a waiter approached me and whispered, "Madam, the boss says it's time for you to return and cut the cake." Return? I snapped back to reality. After a brief pause, I extinguished the cigarette and smiled faintly. "Tell Leo I'm not coming back." Chapter 03. The waiter relayed Miranda's words to Leo. Leo's expression darkened. The others quickly tried to console him. "Madam is probably just in a bad mood. Women throw little tantrums sometimes, boss. You should let it slide. Women need to be coaxed, boss. Why don't you go and cheer her up?" Hearing this, Leo wavered. He and Miranda had known each other since childhood. No one understood better than him how deeply Miranda loved him. Today, he had asked Miranda to be lenient with Sandra and to coax Sandra into leaving. He had promised to spend the night with her. He shouldn't have said that. It was Miranda's birthday. He should have stayed by her side tonight. He had made a mistake. With that thought, Leo turned to the waiter. Was she crying? Miranda had always been a crybaby. She cried when she was sad, cried when she was happy, and even cried over tragic TV dramas, often losing sleep over them. She was sensitive and fragile. She must have been upset by his words earlier and had used the excuse of getting fresh air to go outside and cry in private. Leo felt a pang of guilt. Miranda was his wife, and today was her birthday. He shouldn't have embarrassed her because of Sandra. He owed her an apology. But just as he was thinking this, the waiter shook his head. No. Madam looked very happy and radiant. Leo frowned slightly, surprised by the answer. But after a moment, his expression turned cold, and his voice was as frigid as ice. Then what's her problem? She's acting like a child. If she doesn't want to come back, so be it. The guests exchanged uneasy glances but dared not intervene further. They could only wait. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Still, Miranda did not return to the banquet hall. Leo's expression grew colder. He stood and headed to the garden. A wealthy wife throwing a tantrum and leaving over a mistress, how immature and undignified. She had made herself the subject of gossip. When he saw her, he would definitely reprimand her. But when he arrived, the garden was already empty. The sound of rain filled the air. Near a trash bin, there was only a burnt-out cigarette and a ring. Leo's heart clenched. It was the silver ring he had used to propose to her. Over the years, he had gifted Miranda countless pieces of jewelry, yet she cherished that simple silver ring the most, treating it like a treasure. But now, she had carelessly tossed it into the trash. She didn't want it anymore. At that moment, the wind picked up, carrying the rain and soaking through Leo's shirt. He felt cold to the bone. Yet his mind had never been clearer. Miranda wasn't coming back. Chapter 04. When I returned to the villa, the first thing I did was contact my lawyer. The lawyer, experienced and professional, quickly went over the division of assets with me. After all, this wasn't the first time he'd helped me prepare for a divorce, although the previous attempts always ended inconclusively. But this time was different. I was serious, focused. I didn't know how much time had passed when my phone rang. It was Leo. He had likely realized that I had left early without informing him, leaving him embarrassed in front of the guests. He sounded a little annoyed when I picked up. "Miranda, what exactly are you trying to do?" I gestured for the lawyer to pause. Then, with a calm voice, I replied, "I want a divorce." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Leo spoke again, his tone had softened. "Because of Sandra?" I didn't respond, thinking he had guessed the reason. Leo seemed relieved. His voice took on a coaxing tone. Miranda, she ruined your birthday. That was her fault. You have every right to be upset. I'll have her come over and apologize to you right now. At this point, he still thought I was acting out because of Sandra, yet he wasn't willing to cut ties with her. I found it a little ridiculous. I let out a faint chuckle and interrupted him, my voice steady and calm. Leo, this has nothing to do with anyone else. Then why? I want a divorce because I don't love you anymore. Leo, the road ahead is long. I just won't be walking it with you anymore. The words felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. There was a touch of melancholy. But more than that, there was a sense of relief and freedom. Leo was silent for a moment. On the other end, I could hear the faint tapping of his fingers against the table, a sign that he was deep in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. What are you trying to pull this time? Chapter 05. He still thought I was just throwing a tantrum. It was a familiar scenario. Every time I caught him cheating, after every fight and every tearful confrontation, he would look at me with that same exhausted and indifferent expression, his eyes filled with confusion, and he would ask, over the years, my money and shares in the company have all been in your hands. Those women were nothing more than meaningless flings. No one could ever threaten your position. You will always be my wife. Mrs. Leo, whatever you want, whatever you wish to buy, you can have it immediately. Look around at the women near you. So many of them are struggling just to make ends meet. Their annual salaries don't even match the starting price of one of your rings. Miranda, what exactly are you upset about? What more do you want? Yes, what more could I possibly want? A life of luxury and privilege. So many people envied me, even my father. After beating Leo severely, eventually softened and tried to persuade me. Let it go. He said, pretend you don't know, make it work. Love doesn't hold a candle to financial security. I understood the logic, but I just couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that childhood sweethearts and partners through hardships would end up in a hollow, loveless marriage. I couldn't accept that love would decay into resentment and indifference. So I cried. I fought. And I brought up divorce over and over, hoping to provoke his regret and win back his love. But all I achieved was turning lovers into enemies. Love so intense it breeds hatred. Hatred so consuming it breeds death wishes. I never used to believe that saying, but in those darkest moments, I did. Leo, you probably won't believe this, but there was a time I wanted to kill you, and then kill myself. I thought my words would horrify him, but instead, he asked, so why didn't you? I froze. Then I let out a soft laugh. My voice was light as I replied, because that day, you called me sweetie. Chapter 06. Sweetie, a cherished treasure. My mother passed away early, and my father raised me alone. He gave me a nickname, Sweetie. When Leo learned about it, he started calling me that too, and he called me that for many, many years. When we were young, he would hold my hand as we ran through the fields to school, turning back to smile at me, sweetie, hurry up, or we'll be late. On our wedding night, he kissed my forehead, his fingertips trembling, sweetie, I love you. The day my father died, he held me tightly in his arms, whispering over and over, sweetie, you're not an orphan. From now on, you have me. Don't be afraid. Back then, he loved me the most, but somewhere along the way, he stopped calling me sweetie. Instead, it became Miranda. Just Miranda. I thought I had long forgotten that nickname. Until that night, when I got him drunk and pressed my hands around his neck, tightening my grip bit by bit. He opened his drunken, hazy eyes. He saw my tear-streaked face, and instead of panicking about his tied-up hands, he frowned and asked, baby, why are you crying? Did someone bully you? I froze. He was drunk. He didn't remember betraying me, hurting me. He only remembered loving me and hating to see me cry. So when I told him it was him who had hurt me, Leo panicked immediately. He looked up at me, his voice full of guilt. I'm sorry, sweetie. I was wrong. Hit me if you want. But tomorrow, let me take you out for roasted sweet potatoes, okay? When I was young, I loved roasted sweet potatoes from the stall at the village entrance, but I could never bring myself to buy them. Leo always saved up money to buy them for me, and whenever I offered him a bite, he would refuse. Only if I forced it on him would he finally take a bite. We were poor then, but we loved each other the most. Whenever he made me angry, he'd stare at me with pitiful eyes, like a puppy afraid of losing its owner, just like he did that night. And I, spinelessly, gave in. I let go of his neck and untied the ropes. As his anxious voice called out behind me, I walked out the door, climbed to the rooftop, and looked down. I thought that if I couldn't kill Leo, then maybe I should just end my own life. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, a loud, piercing sound split the night. I turned toward the noise. Fireworks burst one after another in the sky before me. Red, blue, pink, brilliant, beautiful, lighting up half the sky. A breathtaking sight. Now, as I look out through the window at the dark night sky, where there are no fireworks, I speak softly and gently. At that moment, I suddenly didn't want to die anymore. I even felt relieved that I hadn't killed you. Otherwise, I would never have seen such beautiful fireworks again. Leo stayed silent for a long time on the other end of the call. I thought he was shocked by my past madness, but after a while, he suddenly asked, "Do you still want to kill me?" His tone was serious, so I thought for a moment and answered him just as seriously. "No, you're not worth it." Chapter 07. Leo refused to agree to the divorce. It had nothing to do with love. After so many years of marriage, our interests had become deeply entangled. Divorce would be a major upheaval for him, financially and legally. The division of assets would even impact the company's IPO. Aside from regaining his single status, there was no benefit in it for him. Leo was an excellent businessman. He never did anything that wasn't in his best interest. So he chose to ignore it, just like he had ignored my past outbursts. This time, he ignored my request, as well as the divorce agreement and the asset division documents sent by my lawyer. I had no intention of fighting with him. I simply told my lawyer to inform Leo that if he refused to settle amicably, I would take him to court. Then I packed my things and left Beijing. Right before the plane took off, I received a message from Leo. "Miranda, you know this is the most critical time for the company's IPO. Do you really have to do this now? After all these years, do we really have to end it like this?" I thought for a moment and replied, "Yes, we do." Chapter 08. The plane's destination was Iceland, at the meeting point of the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. I stayed in a seaside town where I could see the ocean just by opening the window. Heading further south, surrounded by green fields, I saw the red house from the eye test charts. I realized then it actually existed. The wind blew, making the grass sway. It was beautiful. I joined a tour group. The guide was an Asian woman who skillfully led us through tastings of local delicacies and tours of historical sites. Among the group was a young couple. They were inseparable, clearly deeply in love. I once saw the boy practicing his proposal speech over and over again in private, stumbling at first but growing more confident with each attempt. It took him 3 days. Then, at the Roman temple, surrounded by a shower of rose petals, he proposed. "Fiona, will you marry me?" Despite all the practice, his voice still trembled and faltered, even worse than his first attempts. Awkward, shaky, but sincere. "Yes, I will." The girl, eyes brimming with tears, accepted the ring. Amid cheers and applause, she threw herself into his arms. They held each other tightly, under a cascade of petals. It seemed as though they had embraced the entire world. On the way back, the boy went to pack their things, and the girl sat down next to me. She carefully touched the ring on her finger, cherishing it, and then noticed the faint mark of a ring on my own finger. She blinked and looked at me. "Were you married, too?" "Yes." She was naturally chatty, and upon hearing I'd been married, her curiosity piqued. "How old were you when you got married?" "I just started working. Do you think I'm too young to have said yes?" She was young. Her eyes were filled with dreams of the future, admiration for her fiancé, and nervousness about marriage, afraid of choosing the wrong person, of taking the wrong path. Unlike me, naive and fearless, I had chosen Leo. I believed love could overcome anything. But later, I realized that love was the source of all obstacles. Marriage brought me nothing but endless wounds and tears. My marriage was undoubtedly a failure, so I had no grounds to offer her romantic advice or inspirational speeches. I simply told her, I got married at 23, now I'm 32 and preparing for a divorce. For me, marriage isn't about age. If you like someone, be with them. If you don't, leave them. Keep it pure and simple. She listened, nodding uncertainty, and then hesitantly asked, Are you divorcing because you fell out of love? I smiled and nodded. Yes, we grew tired of each other. Chapter 09. On the 7th day after Miranda left, Sandra had just finished her performance, and Leo personally went to pick her up. On the way back, Sandra began scrolling through short videos on her phone. I got married at 23, now I'm 32 and planning to get a divorce. Is it because you don't love him anymore? Yes, we got tired of each other. Leo's whole body tensed, and he turned to look. He couldn't see the woman's face, but he knew that voice. It was Miranda. She said she didn't love him anymore. She said she was tired of him. It was absurd, completely ridiculous. Miranda's mother passed away early, and her father had died a few years ago. Other than him, she had no one else in this world to rely on. She couldn't leave him, even though she had brought up divorce more than once over the years. Leo knew the truth. Miranda was the one who couldn't bear to let go. She couldn't leave him. She cared more than anyone about having a family of her own. The divorce, the arguments, they were all just tactics to get his attention. There was no way she didn't love him anymore. Leo tried to reassure himself, but deep down, an uneasy feeling spread like a shadow. Desperate for reassurance, he pulled the car over to the side of the road, ignoring Sandra's puzzled look, and took out his phone to send Miranda a message. But when he opened their chat, the last message he had sent, asking when she was coming home, still had no reply. Scrolling further up, he saw her last words, to handle everything through her lawyer and not to contact her. He hesitated. Then he decided to ask where she was. But his message was met with a red exclamation mark. Miranda had blocked him. Leo's fingers trembled slightly. A hollow feeling suddenly gripped his chest. And just then, he heard the girl in the video ask Miranda if he came back now, truly regretting everything and wanting to win you back. Would you forgive him? No. Miranda's voice was soft but resolute. Leo clenched his phone tightly, his jaw taut. She was lying. Miranda was lying. There was no way she wouldn't forgive him. She loved him too much. He refused to believe otherwise. Chapter 10. The day I returned home, Leo came to pick me up personally. He looked sharp, tall, and striking, holding a large bouquet of roses. He walked toward me, attracting quite a bit of attention. Miranda, welcome back. I didn't take the flowers. His brows furrowed slightly, but then he naturally took my suitcase. Baby, stop being difficult, okay? He called me baby. In the past, that might have softened my heart. But now, I just felt puzzled. He didn't seem to know what he truly wanted. When he opened the car door, I noticed Sandra sitting inside. I frowned slightly. Leo quickly explained, Miranda, I know you're still upset that Sandra ruined your birthday. I brought her here to apologize to you. Sandra lowered her eyes, looking pitiful. I'm sorry. Sis, it's all my fault. Please don't be mad at Leo, okay? I silently watched the performance unfold. I didn't say a word. Leo reached out to hold my hand, but I avoided him. He sighed, as if helpless, and tried to compromise with me. If you don't like her, I'll end things with her. Is that okay? At those words, Sandra turned pale, staring at Leo in disbelief. But I refused him. No need. Younger women have their own charms. Leo froze. What? Before he could react, a young man suddenly knocked on the car window. When he saw me, he climbed in without hesitation, took my hand, and intertwined his fingers with mine. Sister, how could you leave me behind? Before I could speak, Leo's expression darkened as he stared coldly at the boy's hand holding mine. Who is this? The boy glanced back at Leo. Then he looked at me. Your ex-husband? I nodded. The boy smiled brightly, radiating youthful energy that was almost blinding. Nice to meet you. Ex-husband, I'm Luis, her new boy toy. His tone was unnervingly calm. Sandra frowned in disgust. How shameless can you be? Luis rolled his eyes. Excuse me? Aren't you the ex-husband's mistress? And now you're acting all high and mighty? If anyone here should be ashamed, it's you. You're a homewrecker, a shameless, disgusting homewrecker. His words hit Sandra like a barrage of bullets. Her face turned pale, her eyes red, and she trembled in anger. She looked at Leo pitifully, hoping he would defend her like he always had. But Leo didn't even glance at her. Let's go home, he said. I spoke up. Take me to my apartment, the place where I now lived. Luis had insisted on following me back home, and since he had nowhere else to stay, he moved into my apartment. Leo gripped the steering wheel tightly. Come home. I need to talk to you. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I frowned in displeasure, but seeing the look on Leo's face, I relented and nodded. Fine. Chapter 11. I returned to the villa. The layout was exactly the same as when I had left. A bit messy. After all, when I left, I took everything valuable with me. Leo's first words were an interrogation. Who is he? I raised an eyebrow. My lover. Didn't you say before that you couldn't accept an open marriage? And now you've found yourself a young man. Did you have fun with him these past few days? Leo frowned tightly. He looked up at me, a faint, careless smile on his lips, but his eyes were cold. I looked back at him and smiled. Yes, a lot. Young men have plenty of energy. My bluntness left Leo speechless, silencing his sarcasm. I grew impatient. Leo, is this what you wanted to talk about? If so, I won't waste my time. He's young, and he always has nightmares when he sleeps alone. I'll go keep him company. Those words should have sounded familiar to Leo. After all, he used to say the same thing to me. Leo clearly remembered it too. His face turned dark, but the next second, he stepped closer, looking down at me and smiling. Miranda, let's end things with them and start over, okay? The person I love is you. I pushed him away and looked at him with exhausted eyes. You don't love me. You're just upset because someone you never thought would leave actually left. And it hurt your pride. You've always been a perfectionist. When you were a kid, if a cookie had a broken corner, you'd rather go hungry than eat it. Now, you'd rather find one woman after another outside while keeping me here to preserve your perfect marriage. After all these years, I know him better than anyone. I know his coldness, his selfishness. He grew tired of me, but he won't allow anyone else to have me. That's not love. It's arrogance. Leo, you're sick. Get help before it's too late. Chapter 12. Leo fled in embarrassment, but the next day, he was outside my door again. He wanted to drive me to and from work. I didn't refuse. Since the divorce hadn't been finalized, we were still the respectable power couple we had always appeared to be. Leo treated me better than ever, reporting every little thing he did, message after message. I didn't read them, let alone reply. At the company, people still called me Mrs. Leo. They knew my status, and I had no interest in working a 9-to-5 job. With enough money, I had no hobby of enduring hardships. I held a nominal position, only showing up at the office occasionally. I had friends at the company, so I heard about Sandra through them. This time, after seeing Leo constantly lingering near my office, one friend asked if Leo had changed his mind. I laughed, then invited her out for dinner after work. She agreed, and I texted Leo, telling him not to pick me up. I'll pick you up afterward. Okay, I agreed. Chapter 13. I left work with my friend, in the underground parking lot. As she drove, she said, Leo must have broken up with Sandra, right? I told you he still cares about you. No matter how much he liked her, he'd never keep her if it made you angry. I smiled. Maybe. Over the past few days, Sandra had called Leo quite a few times. I had seen it, but Leo never answered. Even when I told him, answer it, it might be something important. Leo looked at me with a complicated expression, frustrated and hurt. You don't care. I looked at him and shook my head. No, I don't. I had stopped caring a long time ago. Yet Leo blocked Sandra's number right in front of me, as if he really had a change of heart. During dinner, my friend asked me, if he's changed, are you still going through with the divorce? I didn't answer. I looked out the window, The sky was dark, and the streets were nearly empty. A man stood under a streetlight. I couldn't see his face, but his tall figure was striking. A girl ran out of the apartment building and threw herself into his arms. The man bent down and kissed the corner of her eye. A car passed by them. The headlights lit up their faces. It was Leo and Sandra. I watched them quietly for a moment and then took pictures of everything. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Leo. "Are you done? I'll come pick you up." "No need. I'm not coming home tonight," he replied instantly. "Okay." I looked down. Leo was holding Sandra's hand, leading her into the apartment. Both of them were smiling. Chapter 14. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the ringing of my phone. It was Sandra. She sent me a photo. Leo was sleeping soundly, his head resting on her chest. Her chest was covered in scattered kiss marks. Sensual, sticky, gone was the cold elegance she once had. "Your husband is amazing, sis. He's long lost interest in you. Why do you keep clinging to him? At least keep some dignity for yourself." I saved the photo, thought for a moment, and transferred her 50 cents. Memo, payment. Sandra lost it, bombarding me with messages. I didn't read a single one. Instead, I forwarded the photo to my lawyer. "Evidence of infidelity. Get me as much as you can." The lawyer replied instantly, "Don't worry." Chapter 15. The next morning, when I went downstairs, Leo was already waiting at the door. "Good morning, Miranda." He looked refreshed, satisfaction lingering between his brows after a night of indulgence. He had brought me breakfast, pan-fried buns and soy milk, my old favorites. I picked at one or two absent-mindedly, answering his questions half-heartedly. My indifference was obvious. Since rising to power, no one had treated him with such blatant disregard. His expression darkened. "Miranda, do you really have to treat me like this?" He stopped the car and looked at me, and to my surprise, there was a hint of grievance in his eyes, as if I had wronged him. But faced with my calm, indifferent gaze, he couldn't say anything. "Then just sign the divorce papers. If you can't stand it, let it go." The words hung in the air. Leo's face turned cold. "Not a chance." His tone was firm. I sighed, leaning back against the seat, part resignation, part exasperation. "Leo, why are you so pathetic? When I loved you, you hurt me. When I stopped loving you, you clung to me. Pathetic. You're exhausted." Chapter 16. Leo continued to refuse to sign the divorce papers, so we remained married. But Leo was clingy, too clingy. I knew he was trying to keep me away from Luis. Yet when Luis couldn't find me, he would wait for me outside the office, clinging to my arm and pouting, asking if I didn't care about him anymore. I smiled and coaxed him. "Of course, I care." Under the watchful eyes of others, I sent him away. But when I turned around, I saw Leo standing at the entrance, watching me from a distance. I didn't know how much he had seen, but he said nothing, turning and leaving the company alone, as if he was sulking. But I didn't care. It rained today, the weather turned cold, and I went home alone. As soon as I arrived, Leo took my hand and led me to the dining room. "Didn't you say you wanted lamb soup from the south of the city? I bought it for you." His hand was ice cold. I glanced at him and noticed he was soaked through, his face pale from the cold, yet his eyes were filled with hope and eagerness to please. I took one sip and put the spoon down. "It smells gamey. You drink it." I turned to leave, but Leo grabbed my wrist. "I went out of my way to get this for you because you said you liked it. It took me 2 hours to find the stall. It started raining, and the stall had no cover, so I waited in the rain. But you only took one sip, and you didn't even care enough to ask if I was okay. Miranda, what's wrong with you?" His fingers trembled, and his eyes were full of confusion. "You weren't like this before." "So what?" I looked him straight in the eyes, my gaze calm and unwavering. "I stopped liking you a long time ago. To me, you're a stranger now. Do you expect me to fuss over a stranger? You go out of your way for me and expect gratitude. How is that not ridiculous?" It was as if my words shattered something in him. "You can't not love me." I already looked into it. Luis is just your friend. You two have nothing going on. You're just using him to make me jealous. Deep down, You still care about me. Miranda, baby, you love me, don't you? He looked down at me, his gaze careful and hopeful, but I noticed his death grip on his hands, his knuckles turning white as if my answer would be the final straw that determined his fate. I smiled and cut him off completely. For now, we're just friends. But life is long. Eventually, I'll find someone to spend it with. I'm afraid of loneliness. After my father died, more than anyone, I wanted a home of my own, so I never planned to spend my life alone. A man, a woman, a partner, any of those would do. Leo's eyes turned red, and he asked, "Why can't it be me?" "It can't." I didn't hesitate. Ignoring the way Leo's face instantly went pale, I smiled, turned around, and walked away. I never looked back. Chapter 17. Sandra came looking for me. She brought a pregnancy test report. Compared to the cold, fairy-like appearance she had when we first met, she now carried an air of sultry sophistication, evidence of a woman deeply indulged in passion. It made her even more alluring. No wonder Leo couldn't let her go. Who would be willing to give up such a delicate flower? Sandra told me she was pregnant. She said the reason Leo had been treating me so well lately was because he wanted me to accept the child. After all, I couldn't have children. Hearing this, I raised my eyes to look at her. "Leo told you I can't have children? What else?" Sandra smirked, her tone dripping with provocation. "But Miranda, who doesn't know in our circle that you can't have kids?" She was right. In the 3rd year of our marriage, I had a miscarriage at 3 weeks after discovering Leo's affair. I lost the baby during the argument, and after that, I never had another child. Many people speculated that I had been left infertile, whispering behind my back. They offered solutions, women, promises, but I took a sip of my floral tea, smiling calmly without a trace of anger. It's not that I can't have children, I simply refuse to have them with him. Because he doesn't deserve it. If you want to have his child, that's your problem. Don't drag me into it. And as for divorce, I've been ready anytime. He's the one who refuses. But honestly, you two deserve each other, one cheap, the other cheaper. Sandra's face flushed red, her voice sharp. "Miranda, he loves me. You're just a washed-up old woman." I raised my hand and splashed the floral tea in her face. Then I stood up, looking down at her, soaked and humiliated. I spoke indifferently. "If you're so sure of his love, then hurry up and convince him to sign the papers and stop bothering me." "Sandra, I'll be waiting for your good news." Chapter 18. What a pity. Sandra was useless. She stormed into the house, announcing her pregnancy to Leo, her face glowing with the tenderness of a first-time mother. But Leo's first reaction was to look at me, "Miranda, this was an accident." Every time his words left Sandra stunned, but moments later, she snapped out of it and clutched Leo's arm. "Leo, you clearly said you wanted to have a child with me. You said you hoped the baby would be as beautiful as I am. How can you call this an accident? This is supposed to be the result of our love. Tell me you love me. Tell me you're tired of Miranda. Why won't you divorce her? What can she give you? I love you. We're having a child. Why won't you marry me?" Leo's expression turned cold. He lowered his eyes to her. "Get rid of it." Sandra instinctively covered her stomach, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. "No, I won't. This is our child. How can you be so heartless to ask me to abort it? Girls always look beautiful when they cry, pitiful and fragile." But Leo's eyes rested on her belly without the slightest trace of emotion. "I won't repeat myself. Get rid of it." Sandra screamed and covered her ears, as if blocking out the cruel words would make them disappear. The two of them were locked in a standoff. I glanced briefly at the hidden camera and continued watching the show unfold with detached amusement. Sandra eventually collapsed from exhaustion. Leo had her sent to the hospital. "I'm sorry, Miranda. I'll handle this properly. He promised me." I paused, then smiled. "Don't bother. I don't care." The words fell. Silence filled the room. Leo stared at me, his dark eyes swirling like a pool of ink, but the corners were tinged with fragile red. "You don't care?" He looked utterly wounded by my indifference. I met his gaze firmly. It wasn't until he instinctively grabbed my wrist that I noticed how badly his fingers were trembling. How can you not care? You're supposed to be upset. You cry so easily, why aren't you crying now? Miranda, baby, please don't look at me like that. There was a hint of pleading in his voice. At that moment, he seemed pitiful, reduced to begging for my pity, but all I felt was disgust at him and at the dirt he represented. Should I care? We're getting divorced. Who you have kids with? And how many? Has nothing to do with me anymore. Leo, I truly don't love you anymore. Watching his figure waver, on the verge of collapse, I smiled. We've known each other for so long. Let's at least end things with dignity. Sign the papers. Chapter 19. Leo finally signed the papers. He had no choice. Sandra had revealed her pregnancy to the media, turning their scandal into a public spectacle. The stock market wavered. Shareholders were dissatisfied. Leo didn't want me to sue him, and with his affair now widely exposed, my lawyer secured the maximum settlement, 70% of all assets. The lawyer told me, technically, it was 60%. The extra 10% was Mr. Leo's voluntary offer. I smiled and accepted it without hesitation. The day I walked out of the civil affairs office, it rained. Maybe I have some connection to rainy days. All the major events in my life seem to happen on rainy days. The day we got engaged, the day we married, the day Leo first cheated, the day I decided to leave, and now, the day we divorced. Under the drizzling rain, Leo stood beside me and said softly, "Let me drive you." I shook my head. No need. Someone's coming to pick me up. Right after I spoke, Luis appeared with an umbrella. "Sis, I'm here. It's cold out, put on an extra coat. You're already coming down with a cold." He fussed over me, draping a jacket over my shoulders. I accepted it without hesitation. Then, I stepped under his umbrella, and just then, the rain stopped. I looked up. The sun broke through the clouds, dispersing the gloom. Its light poured down, warming the chill of the rain. I smiled, turned around, and waved at Leo. Goodbye. The rain had cleared. Goodbye. To the shadows. Epilogue, regret. Useless. On the day of the divorce, Leo stood there, watching Miranda walk away under an umbrella with another man. He could still hear the boy chattering and Miranda's helpless laugh, but her eyes sparkled with genuine ease, a lightness he hadn't seen in her for a long time. He had always known Luis wasn't Miranda's lover. She wasn't capable of it. She had tried once, finding a boy and acting close with him, but when Leo saw the boy's face, he didn't worry. Because the boy looked just like him, she couldn't let him go, so she would never truly take that step. Sure enough, that ridiculous act ended within a month. Miranda never crossed the line again. Drunk one night, Leo had told a friend about it. The friend froze, then sneered. "Maybe she doesn't love you. Maybe she just isn't as pathetic as you. Leo, you're going to lose Miranda like this. And when that day comes, don't say I didn't warn you." What had he said back then? Leo thought for a moment before remembering. He had laughed confidently and said, "Impossible. She'll never leave me." He thought he didn't love Miranda anymore. After so many years, he had been sure he was tired of her. But now, watching Miranda's figure disappear into the distance, his chest felt like it was being torn apart, as if he had lost the most important thing in his life. For a moment, he wanted to run after her. But as he took the first step, he stopped. He knew Miranda wouldn't turn back. She had once told him, "If you like someone, stay with them. If you don't, leave." Leo, I really don't love you anymore. Let's end this. She hadn't lied. She simply didn't love him anymore. Not ever again. Her future would be bright, like the sun after the rain, radiant and dazzling. And he would remain standing in the rain for the rest of his life. But no one cared. No one ever would again.